At this point, the retopology is almost done for the character. We're just gonna do a couple more things for the head here. Initially, I thought it was pretty done, but looking back at this point, there are just a couple of different things I want to change up. And then we're also going to do the eyes, and we're going to do the shirt as well. So if you're already really comfortable with this workflow, this video here is not necessary for you to watch, because we're going to use literally the exact same tools as we've done in the former video. But it's still nice to watch if you're interested in this specific character here. So the first thing I'll do is I'll model in what's called the caruncula. The caruncula is the bit in the eye here, which is a bit of the corner of the eye, kind of the tear duct. Currently he doesn't have that, and it can look a bit weird. So I'm just going to select these polygons here, and I'm just going to add a bit of like the caruncula. But as we already mirrored the character over, we need to use symmetry for this. Symmetry you can find up here. And if you hit the Alt key, you get options. So for this character here, we just need to have default settings. Symmetry on and the x-axis on. Which means if this is on, we're going to mirror like this. Please keep in mind that symmetry has traditionally been a bit wonky in ZBrush or in Modo, so it may not work perfectly. To be honest, I prefer to not use symmetry, just because I'm not 100% sure if it's going to work in all cases. And it can be, let's be frank, a pain in the ass to fix the symmetry if you thought it was 100%, but turns out half an hour ago it was turned off. But for this example here is going to be fine, because we're just going to do minor things. So just select these, the inner here, the inner polygons. Just make sure they're selected on either side. And we're just going to add a bevel to it. You can also add this as a separate object, but I prefer to keep it in one, just to keep it simple. So just add another bevel. You repeat the last action just by holding down the Shift and just clicking again. So I just hit Shift and click, and it's going to repeat the last action. So just do this. Then I'll use the Move brush in the Smooth tool. Sorry, the Move brush in the Sculpting tools. I'll map this to the S key, which is really handy. You can also just find it under Sculpting and Move. This is extremely nice, because now we can just move it around, and we can just smooth it out by holding down the Shift key. So let's just move this around a bit here so it covers the eye shape a bit better. So if you look in the mirror, you can see that everyone has this caruncula in the corner of the eye here. And it is actually rather important for the shape of the eye. If you want any kind of realism, you need the caruncula in it. Just make sure you have clean geometry. So I smooth a lot of stuff out here, like this, when I'm working. So this is where I model a lot of organic stuff if I'm not using the retopology tools. I'm using the Move brush, and I'm just pushing and pulling polys around and smooth them as I go. It's pretty much the same way I'm doing it in ZBrush. Just here I have more control over the individual polys, as I can actually like add cuts and all that to it. So let's just refine the shape a bit. And this region here, you don't really have to match the sculpt, because frankly, the sculpt doesn't have this amount of detail in it. So we're going to have to just re-sculpt this region. And that's fine. You don't have to add all the detail and all the shape in the sculpt. The sculpt at this point here is pretty much just like a first stage of the design. So I'm also seeing that this region here is pretty uneven. So I'm going to select this, and I'm just going to make it slightly more even here. So I'm using the Slide tool, which I map to Control-Alt-S. Just using the range select here by holding down, selecting one, hovering over the next one, and just hitting right mouse button. So we just want this to be as even as possible, because there is a fair bit of deformation happening in this region here. Again, doesn't really matter for this tutorial, as this is not about deformation. This guy here won't move, but this is a general rule. It's nice to keep it nice and even. I also want to add another loop here, because there is a lot of curve going on here. So I just want to make sure this is all supported in topology. So I'm just going to add this loop here, just so we can get a bit of curve. But as you can see, it doesn't actually follow the curvature of the nose. But if we enable preserve curvature, which is really nice, we can see that it preserves the curvature way better. And now we can start to slide this up here a bit. So I would highly recommend mapping the slide tool to a hotkey, as you will be using it a fair bit. So just smooth this out a bit as well. Again, at this point, I'm not too worried about if it doesn't match the sculpt 100%, because we will just have to resculpt that, and you just have to accept that. It's a lot easier to resculpt it regions than it is to trying to fix this broken foundation. Let's review. It's pretty nice and even. If this was a production model, I would definitely add another loop here and another loop here, because you want this region here is going to form a fair bit as well when he's doing anything with his eyebrows and forehead. So you want it to be more even, but we're not going to care about this at this point, because we could spend days and days on this just to make sure it's working perfectly, and we just have to say stop at some point. Another thing I'm noticing is the neck here is really sparse. So there's a lot of information happening in the neck region. Like, you know, when you're bending forward and backwards, you just want to add a couple more spans here. So that's easy to do. Just select an edge, hit Alt-C for loop slice tool, and now you can just add a loop here. Make sure slice selected is off. Slice selected, again, just to remind you, is if you want to select only this region here and slice it, and slice selected is on, it will only slice this region here, which is extremely handy. But just make sure that it's not on when doing this. I pretty much have preserve curvature on when doing any kind of organic modeling. Don't keep it on if you're doing hard surface modeling, because then you want to control everything in hard surface modeling. Here you have less control because the computer is doing the shape for you. You pretty much don't want the computer to do the shape for you if you're doing hard surface. But here we have some level of there's a certain percentage where we can allow the computer to do curves for us and do the shape. So now we have more loops here, and this is going to deform slightly better if he's moving his head around. So just save this new version. 03. All right, so let's do the eyes. I'm going to hide everything but the eyes here. This will mean hide the model. And now let's do the eyes. We're going to do the eyes in two objects. We're going to make two meshes. So the inner mesh is going to be the iris, the pupil, and all that. And the outer mesh is going to be the cornea. And the cornea is going to be pure glass. And the inner object is where the texture is actually going to be. So let's hit F2 and just drag out a sphere. Sorry, make a new object first. And then we do this. Go to front view and just drag it out. Oh, as you can see, we have symmetry on, which means it drags out two of them. Just undo this, make sure symmetry is off. We don't want symmetry in doing this. It's way easier to do this on one object. All right, so annoying thing in Modo is if you want to change segments after you drop the tool, you can't do it. So you have to be absolutely sure that the amount of segments here are the same amount you want in the final model, which is really annoying. I really wish they would change this. In Maya, for instance, you can it's way less destructive. You can drop the tool and you can have the same amount of segments or change the segments afterwards. But all right, this is fine. So now we have a standard mesh here. And we can use this to create both the meshes we want. Let's see here. All right. So just go into topology mode by hitting Control Space. You hit Shift Space Bar toggles between item mode and polygonal mode or component mode. So between item and component mode, and spacebar toggles between the various components. So verts, edges, and polygons. So just move this into place so it fits it. And you want to be accurate when doing the eyes, because the eyes are really important for getting the appeal right in the character. So make sure it's also going facing forward here. So we can use this to create the pupil and the iris and also the bulge on the cornea. If this doesn't make sense to you, just pay attention, I'll explain it. We can go into topology mode, so we can actually see what we're doing. And let's just duplicate this guy. Hit Ctrl D. And now we're going to have one which is inner and one which is outer. We will merge them into one later on. So this is not a huge concern for now. We're not going to, the naming, I mean, we're not going to keep the naming like this because we'll merge them just into eye. So let's do the inner first. Hide the outer. And the inner, I'm just going to, I want to be the distance between these two. This is too much, and this here is too little. So I want to have something in between. So for this, we simply just cut it in half like this. Make sure preserve curvature is on. This is important because if it's not on, you can see the curvature here is just flat. So that can really screw up a curve. So just cut it in half. And now we can just select this. Select this. And we can just bevel it in now. Just bevel in a little bit like this. I actually just want to delete this edge here as well. This is just screwing up our shape right now. And just select the inner vert and just move it in. So this point here is going to create our pupil. And when we make the pupil is we don't just paint a texture. We're going to do it in a slightly more physically correct manner. We're going to bevel it like this. Select the vert, hit B for bevel, and just drag it out. And now we have a hole here. Or sorry, a flat surface, which we're going to create into a hole. So use the extrude tool, which I map to Alt X instead of Shift X. Because as I said before, I use Shift X for grow and shrink selection. Grow is Shift X and shrink selection is Shift C for me. That just makes it a lot easier instead of like moving my hand over to Shift and up arrow and down arrow, because then I actually have to move my hand. Anyway, so this here is a pretty good way of doing it. I'm just going to delete this loop here as well, so we have a slightly straighter edge, a straighter form. And if we subdivide this, we can see what happens. Let's just hide this. It's too soft now. So we need to add a loop here. And we need to add a loop here. So this is just, the concept here is just called triple edging. By adding triple edges, we can now see the sharpness. Compare this to this, it's just a lot sharper. But keep in mind that you don't want these to be too sharp. If you move this here and there, it's going to be mechanical. And it's going to be way sharper than it is in real life. So you always want to have some rounding on this. Add a loop here and a loop there as well. I've remapped this tool, add loop tool, to Q. Just a Q on the keyboard, because I use this a lot as well. So just hit B for bevel and just drag this in a couple of times. And as I said, nobody will ever see the inside here. So I'm just going to hit Control and backspace, which is going to collapse it. And please use hotkeys for this kind of stuff. I know I'm stressing a lot, but please learn the hotkeys for this kind of modeling and make your own custom hotkeys, because it will speed up modeling significantly. Just delete this, and I want to have this even. So just have like something like 3 spans, 4, yeah, something like this is fine. So now we have somehow even polygons in here. Let's just add a couple here as well. It doesn't really matter, it just looks more visually appealing. So if you subdivide this now, we can see that it's now a nice shape for this. So this here is going to be our iris. This is going to be a pupil. And this is going to be our what's called the sclera. The sclera is simply just the white region of the eye. But this is what's going to be painted afterwards. We're not going to do any texturing on the cornea, which is going to be this guy. So let's do the cornea. So if you subdivide this, they're going to be identical up to this point here, because we just simply duplicated the same sphere. So we're going to do the same thing as we did with the other one. Enable wireframe. I map this to Shift W, but you can also find it by holding Control and 1 and go into wireframe, toggle wireframe on. This is the same thing. So add a loop here in the middle. Set the count to 1. And I'm sorry if I'm going a bit too fast for some users here, but this is not a beginner's tutorial. We will do more beginner's tutorials later on, but this would take far too much time if this was for the very beginner. So apologies for that. Just extrude this out or bevel this out a little bit, because now we want this kind of bulging on the cornea. This is going to look really nice with reflections on. You can see this like slight bulging, but we don't want it to be too sharp, because that would look really mechanical and weird. We want this kind of soft transition here. Just move this out a bit as well, because we don't want this to intersect. We want this now to go outwards. I'm also just going to scale the entire thing up. So we really don't want intersections with the bottom or the underlying geometry. So I'm just going to use the push tool for this. I've mapped the push tool to Shift P. I believe you can find it under deformation. Here it is. Deformation and scale tool. So just enable the push tool and you can just see what's happening. It's just pushing everything on the normal. So there we go. So now it's not intersecting. If you have intersecting geometry like this, you can mask the artifacts in rendering. There's a big chance it would simply look black or will flicker between black and white and just look nasty in general. All right, so we have a problem here, which is we have a huge pole here, and there's a lot of stretching. So I'm simply just going to bevel this in a little bit, just so we get a nice curvature. Nothing fancy, just creating a nice curvature. And again, the way we activate the bevel tool again is simply by holding down the Shift key, and then clicking. So I can just keep modeling like this, by hitting the Shift key every time. The bevel tool is also really nice, because if you hit up and down, it's going to, go up and down. If you hit left to right, it's going to change the radius, or rather the shift and inset here. So this is very handy. Now you can see we have a bit of like this little point here. So just select the vert and just move it down. Move it down a little bit. All right, so this is pretty cool. I want to just move this guy here in so it's slightly more centered, and move this guy out a little bit. So now we have a nice cornea as well. It's a bit too uneven though, so I'm just going to select this loop. Just move it out slightly. As a general rule, you always want to work without subdivisions on. So we don't work in subdivision mode like this and then move it, because then you see we get this nice shape here, for instance, and then we disable subdivisions and it's a different shape. So you want to control as much as you can by working without subdivisions on. And again, spend some time on the eyes, because they are really important. So, all right, so now we have an eye. So I'm just going to merge these together. You can do this by selecting both of them and going to merge meshes. Or you can just do what I prefer to do. I just hit select entire thing and just Control X and then just Control V, which is simply just cut and then paste it in. So now we have a model here. We have one model, one layer, which has both of them. I think I actually want to push this a little bit as well out. So we can go again to the tool here under Deform and Push. If you don't have it to hotkey, just push it out a little bit. All right. All right, so that's cool. So we can now see there's a slight gap between the two meshes here. So we see there's a slight gap here, which is fine. So the outer mesh is going to be glass and the inner mesh is going to be something organic. It's going to be essentially flesh. All right, cool. So let's unhide this, and now we can see where it sits. We probably want to just add some rotation to this as well. So now it's pretty much in the middle of the eye like this. And I do prefer to keep a separate mesh per eye as well. So I'm not going to have just eyes layer. I'm going to have left and right eye. So you can do this by simply just mirroring over. This is the same thing as before. This is Shift V, select the item, and just mirror it over like this. You might want to wait with doing this until you've done the UVs for it, because then you can, if you're duplicating something around, it can be a big advantage to do the UVs before you're duplicating over. Simply because then you don't have to UV map it twice, or you don't have to copy the UVs between objects. But for now, we're not going to care about that. We can always just copy the UVs back afterwards. And we'll do the UVs after our secondary sculpting passes are done. And we'll talk more about that later on. So now I have the eyes. Again, save a new version. I've had a week with a lot of crashes in Maya, so I don't trust software now, so I'm going to save a lot. Almost lost like 2 days of work because files were corrupted. So please save a lot. So alright, so that's the eyes. We're just going to, before doing anything else, we're just going to name them. So this would be the left eye. And this would be the right eye. And when you talk about naming, you always have which should be left and which should be right. Because if you're looking at here, this is now the left eye from the front view. And this is now the right eye. So what should naming be? Well, some different places use different naming. I always just stick to the characters left and characters right. It just keeps it easier. So this is now the left eye, because this is the character's left eye. Just a nice little convention for you here. Then we're going to do the shirt. And this is going to be done exactly the same way as before. We're going to create a new piece of geo. Just hitting N for new layer. We call this shirt. Or we're also just going to put the eyes into the model group. And we're not going to call this retopo, we're going to call this head. And we're just going to rename this to hair. No, we know to afterwards. All right, let's work on a shirt layer. Put this in here, into the model group. And then we can simply just start. Most of this is going to be symmetrical. So we're going to do this in a symmetrical manner for most of this. There's no point in making this asymmetrical when 95% is completely symmetrical. So let's just start by dragging out as we did before. Let's go into topology mode. As we're in the topology tab here, we can just go to settings and just enable topology mode, enable verts, and make sure this is set to the same as before. Topology pen, and now we're just going to drag it out. Exactly the same way as before. We're going to work with big polys. And clothing is really annoying to make, to be honest. I prefer to use simulation if you're doing proper clothing. Clothing can be extremely hard to sculpt. So using something like Marvelous Designer can be a huge advantage. Just going to bring this over here. Just trying to keep with the flow of the color here. Select this and just make sure this is zeroed out using a little script, or by going to F2 and going to vertex and set position and hit 0. Going to topology pen. So the shirt is a lot easier to model than the head, because it's just a simpler shape. So you can see how quick this is once you get a hang of it. We can also just hit the right mouse button and drag, and we can just drag out the entire thing. What you can also do now is you can, actually let's try this out. Select this, and bridge. This is awesome. So you can just bridge this by hitting Shift B if you have those hotkeys set up. Then we can just go to topology pen, and this is just going to just snap this now to this shape here. So the bridge tool is amazing. And I said before, that's one of the reasons I use Modo for retopology, because I haven't seen anything like that in any other tools or any other packages out there, like Maya or Max or anything like that. So it's kind of nice that we have a simple color like this, because colors can be really tricky to do. If you have overlapping shapes like a prop color is, if you have like a proper shirt, it can be really hard to actually do, at least time consuming. Because you're in a lot of tight areas, which can be really tricky to reach, and you have to hide a lot of geometry. But this here is easy enough to do. So just select this, well, actually, this is kind of cool. Instead of selecting this, and this, and this, and this in bridging, which is working perfectly fine, we can just bridge this. Sorry, we can just bridge this together. So instead of selecting like 20 polygons, we can just select 2. In this case, it's not a huge advantage, but let's say this strip here is like 200 polygons. We can just select either end and just hit bridge. And again, this is under hit F2, and this is under polygon and bridge. And it's using continuous bridge and auto connection on. So handy. You might have realized that I like the bridge tool. Best thing ever. So we're also just going to make some overlap here. We could just cut it here, but we're just going to make sure there is some overlap down here as well. Do the same thing as before. Select this guy, select this guy, and just bridge. Boom. And just make sure these snap to the surface. And we also just want to make sure that these are all zeroed out. And as I said before, my little menu here comes with this tutorial. So handy. If you find anything, if you have any commands you'd use more than like every 10 minutes or like just often, just map it to a key or make a little script for it. In Modo, you can make macros very easily. So for instance, this one here is 0. This is the macro, which is essentially what it's doing. It's just selecting the polygons or the verts, and it's just setting a value for it. Very easy. I don't really know how to script. I know a lot of guys use Python and all that. I don't really know how to do that yet. It's on my agenda to learn, but I can still make macros in Modo. I would just search for tutorial on making macros, because it's really handy. All right, let's just make this a bit cleaner. So it's almost ready to be mirrored over. Once it's been mirrored over, I'm going to stop with the retopologizing as such. I'm going to stop with using the topology pen tool, and I'm not going to snap to the background mesh. Then I'm just going to model straight onto the model using old school polygonal modeling. Which is also going to illustrate why it's useful to know the basics before starting with only retopology. Because retopology is easy. It's a lot easier if you well, put it like this. If you do retopology like this, you're only thinking about topology, which is, it's fairly easy. If you're doing sculpting, you're only thinking about sculpting. which is also, you know, it's not that hard. If you're doing old school topology modeling using planes and box modeling and all that, you're thinking about form and topology at the same time. You're solving an artistic and a technical challenge simultaneously, which is really hard. It's a lot harder than splitting it up into two parts. So it's a very valuable skill to have. So this is getting there. Just want to spend a little bit more time on this. All right, that's pretty much it for snapping into the background. So let's just take away the ref here. And again, just make sure that this is all snapped to 0. Yeah, it wasn't. We just have to select the mesh now and mirror it over. And as a pro tip in Modo, you don't actually have to select it right here. Because in Modo, if nothing is selected, that means everything is selected. So let's say we want to move this around now. We can simply just move it around right away without selecting anything. Because again, if nothing is selected, everything is selected. Which means if we want to mirror this over, we just hit Shift V for mirror. And we just activate it. And then it's done. This is really nice in a lot of cases where you have a heavy model, or you just want to save time. It's just a general Modo philosophy here. So I'm going to disable the topology mode, just for now. And I'm not going to care too much about matching the mesh anymore, because we will definitely have to resculpt this. So I'm just going to bring this over here a little bit, like so. And if we look at the mesh again, you can see this, the right side, the screen right side is overlapping screen left side. So we just want to make something which is equivalent to that. Disable the shirt again. Which means this needs to go underneath. Hit the Z key to use edge extend. Scale it down to just make it straighter. Do the same thing with this one actually as well. Just make it straighter. So now we have some basic overlap going on. I just want to overlap a little bit more. Well, let's just check the ref again. So we don't have these points here. These points here don't exist on our model. And this guy here is also extending over like this. Actually, before doing that, let's extend this over once more, like this. And extend, add a loop here. And then we can extend this out. Like so. And the story behind this character, which we're talking about in sculpting videos, is that he's old and he's wearing like old clothing. So stuff doesn't have to be completely accurate here. Some imperfections can add to the story. So just disable wireframe and disable toggle verts. So now we can just evaluate the shape a little bit like this. Just bring this down a little bit like this. And we can definitely add more complexity to this model here in ZBrush. So, all right, this is pretty much it for the shirt. We will for sure adjust the shape of this in ZBrush later on. Let's just do some final tweaks here. We want to add some thickness to this as well, because you really don't want this paper thin surface. Even if you're doing something like paper, like in 3D, you still want to add thickness to it, because everything in the real world has thickness. And if you don't, you're missing this tiny little like edge bevel here, which just catches the tiniest specular highlight. So we're just going to select it, or we don't have to, because as we established before, if nothing is selected, everything is selected. And then we're going to hit F2, polygons, I believe it is, and we have the tool called thicken. I mapped this to Shift T because you use thicken a lot. So we simply just hit thicken, and then we get this little manipulator here. I'm going to hide the head just so we can see exactly what's going on. And this is an annoying thing about Modo again. Now, by hiding this, the tool has been dropped. So let's undo this. It was actually good that this happened. Because, yeah, let's hide this. And then let's enable thicken again. So in Maya, for instance, you can drop tool, you can go around and move stuff and everything, and then go back and adjust the extrude or the thickening. In Modo, you can't. This is baked into the model, which can be a huge problem. So modeling in Modo can be very destructive. So keep that in mind when modeling. Really important that you're selective about your modeling operations, which in one way is kind of nice, because if it is destructive, that means that you're going to think about what you're doing. But another way, sometimes you get unexpected changes or requests for changes. But that's enough of my little Modo rant. We now have a mesh which has thickness to it, and you can see it is like nice thickness here. If you want to, you can just add a little bit of a loop here, just so we have slightly more definition here. So I think this is it for the cloth. We're just going to make some nice little buttons as well. I'm going to make a new mesh. And in F2 mode, or using my little menu here called creation and cylinder, we can just create a little button using some cylinders, or rather a cylinder. This is kind of cool tip as well. When you're doing creation like this, you can just hold on the right mouse button and go left and right, and you can see the sides and segments change here. So this is really cool. So you don't actually have to go in here. You can just go left and right, drag the right mouse button, and there you go. So I'm going to use 12, and I'm going to use, I'm going to use 16 actually. I like that it's divisible by 4. Because then I can do this. I can select, let's see here, I can select 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, and select 3, 4. And I can do this, bridge it, and we get a perfectly gridded result like this. So I'm going to redo that because that was really quick. Essentially, I don't want this, because what I have here is I can extrude it down and I can do all this stuff and I can collapse it, but I don't like this. I don't like to have triangles like this. It's messy, and if let's say I have to cut a hole in this or cut something in here, it's hard. So I'm going to delete this. I don't want this here. So delete this as well. And then we select 4 here. Then we count 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we count another 4. Which means the bridge tool will now perfectly bridge between these. And it's going to connect it up in this really nice manner. Which is what I've been talking about before. So nice. You can do the same thing for the backside here. Let's just move the entire thing out a bit. And let's just hide. Let's just hide this. Where is it? All right, this should not be called inner, this should be called shirt. And see, this is why you name stuff, because now I got confused over it. And also, I'm not editing out these little mistakes here, because I think it's nice that you guys can see some of the mistakes we're doing and how to work with them. So now you can see by not naming it properly, I got confused. So just count the same ones. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4. Go to polygon mode and just delete this guy. This is kind of cool. So we were edge mode, and this has a certain selection. Then I went into polygon mode, deleted a polygon, have a selection here. So you can have different selections. You can have vertex here. You can select some verts. You can go to edge, and different edges are selected, and polygon and different polygons are selected. This is a really cool feature of Modo. So do the same thing here, and just bridge. And we have this really nice mesh here now. I just want to create a little button. Nothing fancy. Go into polygon mode. And now we can just move this little guy around. Select this and just scale it down and bridge it in. Sorry, don't scale down and bridge it in. Use the bevel tool and then scale it in. We can see here, this is a limitation of the bevel tool. If you use the bevel tool here, you can see that the corners here aren't really nice. The inner 4 polygons aren't being properly scaled down. So what you can do instead is you can use the extrude tool. So use the extrude tool, and then you can simply use this as scaling tools. This is really nice. Now we get this uniform scale, which is what we want in this case here. And then we can use the bevel tool just to add a bit of shape here to it. So I use this a lot. I use a lot of extrude and scaling, like this. Nice little button. Let's add a loop, a couple loops here. We want to add a loop here. This is what I mean with, if you're doing hard surface, disable preserve curvature. Let's add a loop here using preserve curvature. You see what we're getting, right? We're getting this kind of funky results with some places it's preserving curvature, and some places it's giving us flat results. I don't want this. I want to disable this. Now we can just move this down here, and you can add a loop up here. Another way to do this, which is also really nice, is if you want accuracy, you can select one here and use loop slice, disable preserve curvature, set it to symmetry, set the count to 2, and now we can set the count to 2. Sorry. Now we can just get a symmetrical result like this. This is really nice. For this though, it doesn't really matter if we're using the add loop tool or if we're doing it symmetrically here. Because it doesn't matter if the smoothing is 100% identical on either side here. But this is just another way of doing it. And we got a nice little button. We're just going to duplicate this around a little bit. Again, we would ideally wait for duplicating until after we've done the UVs. But that's actually a nice way of doing it as well, doing like this, because then I can show you how to duplicate UVs around later on. So another one here, and let's have another one here. So adding something like buttons like this can really add a lot of detail to your model, and it can just bring it to the next level. I'm not saying that adding buttons specifically can do that, but adding all these little things like adding buttons, adding seams and all that can really just take it further. So now we have a model here which is pretty much done in terms of retopology. Let's just review it first. Let's enable wireframe. And let's just go through everything here. So we have the eyes here. And we have 2 meshes. We have the outer edge, and we have the inner mesh. I've remapped select inverted to the number 2 on the keyboard, just so you can see that. And the outer mesh is slightly pushed out. Then we have both of them here. Then we have the hair. And this is simply done using auto retopology. I'll get back to this in just a little bit. We're just going to review this first. Then we have the head. Then we have the buttons. Again, rename them right away. Buttons. And then we have the shirt. So you can see how clean our scene is, as we just need to keep it clean. This is so important. And particularly if somebody is going to use our scene later on, somebody in a different company or somebody you put your publish a scene online or something, it's so important. Anyone can go into my scene here right now and start working right away. I want to add a little loop here, like this. I'm going to disable enable curvature here because I'm seeing some slightly funky stuff going on here. And I'm going to add another loop here, and another loop, a couple other loops around just here, just to keep it a bit straighter. Oh, sorry, a bit more square. There is no point in keeping the model low poly for doing this kind of work. Sure, low poly definitely has its place in the world, but I don't really care. I work in visual effects. I'm used to high poly. And unless there's a reason for going low poly, like for instance you're doing a game, just don't bother. Just add the necessary polygons. Polygons are cheap today. We don't have a polygon budget to really maintain. So alright, this is pretty cool. Okay, this is working fine. As I said, I want to go back to the hair because we haven't touched this. We literally haven't touched this since it got from ZBrush, or since it was made in ZBrush. And this means that we're not really sure if this is working. It probably is, but we just want to be sure. Because sometimes when you use Dynamation in ZBrush, you get funky results. You might get some, here you can see some stuff here, which is a bit nasty. We just want to smooth this out. And again, the issue we had before, Modo as well. This is a Modo display issue. Hit F twice and this is solved. Flip and flip. I just want to go over a couple places and just smooth it out a bit. Because don't trust auto retopology. It looks cool, but it might be a bit deceiving. Just make sure it's valid before you pass it on down a pipe. If something is too good to be true, you know, it might be. But alright, it looks pretty good. There doesn't seem to be any like actual errors in this mesh. So that's nice. If you want to spin the model around like this, which is kind of cool, it's a nice way to review the model. Just hold on Alt and use the right mouse button and just drag the right mouse button and release. Now you can just spin around the model. It seems a bit like a gimmick, but it's actually strangely useful. So alright, so before we pass any of this on down the pipe, we're going to just make sure, just a little QC, just a little quality control on it before we do anything else. The way we do this is a couple of ways. We need to go to lists, statistics, and here we can just go to polygons and we can just make sure that there are no n-gons here. That's the first thing I do. We just want to have no n-gons. Ideally we want to have no triangles either, but it's not a huge issue. So we don't have any n-gons here, you can just see it here. If you want to select this, you can just hit the plus side, or the plus icon, and it will select everything here. So you can see all the triangles on the head are hidden in strategic places, like on the inside of the head, or the inside of the eyes, inside of the mouth, and inside of the ears. Also, as a little tip as well, if you want to, let's just isolate this. We could just delete this. A lot of guys will be like, hey Henning, why aren't you just doing this? It's fine. The problem with this is now we have an open hole. We want this to be as watertight as possible because when we subdivide stuff in ZBrush, the holes here will shrink. So this here might go into might look something like this. We don't want stuff to shrink in ZBrush. We want to control it. We want to control the mesh perfectly. So what we're doing here is actually not good. We ideally want to close this off. I mean, this is not going to matter for us because considering we have a shirt on top. So this is never going to be visible. But I would strongly advise you to never have any open holes in a model, which I might have mentioned before. So alright, so once this is fine, we're going to do a secondary mesh cleanup, which you can find under geometry. And let's see here, mesh cleanup. Before we do this, save the model. Because whenever you do something automatic to the model or to your mesh, stuff might go a bit crazy. It's probably going to be fine, but I just wanna save the model before I do anything unexpected. So this is under mesh and cleanup, and here you see all these checkboxes, like merge disco values. I don't know what a disco value is, but it sounds funky. Apparently we don't want disco values in the model. So just hit OK. And now you can see here, we get it's fixed 156 vertex map values merged. This does not matter to us because we're not really using vertex maps. It's fine. But we still just want to do this test on everything because there might be something here. You really don't want to push something down a pipe which has errors in it. The cleanup here is pretty good at fixing stuff here as well. So here you can see it had to merge some verts. It was probably fine without, but we just want to make sure. So just do this on everything. Mesh cleanup. Again, disco values, whatever that means. All right, another thing we want to do is we want to check for open holes in the model. It's so easy that you have a hole somewhere which you don't want. So if you go to component mode, meaning you just in this mode here, where you can toggle between the various verts, edges, and polygons, and if you hold down Control key, you can see the edges changes from edges to boundaries. If you control click here, it's going to select any holes in the model. So we have no holes in this. So let's say we have, we go into the head here, and actually let's do the hair first. No holes, perfect. On the head we will have holes. You can see we're gonna have holes here. And you can see the bottom here. Again, this is fine for our use here, but you really want to make sure that this is controlled. For instance, if you do this, or something which is easy to happen is you have a hole here, and you select it, and now you can see this lights up here. Be careful about this. You really don't want this because this will screw you up in ZBrush later down the line. A nice way though to find them, because sometimes if you have a really heavy model, it can be hard to actually see the hole. If you go to soft selection mode, which I believe is under fall off and soft selection, go to move brush, the move tool by hitting W, and now you can just right mouse button up, and you can see this. So if you have this little hole here, let's just delete this. Select the boundary edge, and now you can see very easily it totally lights up like a firefly, which is perfect. Just to do this. So again, soft select is under fall off and soft select. Important. Do the same thing for everything. And I'm being very meticulous here. That's just because I know how incredibly important it is to be clean here. If you skip being clean here, you might waste hours down the line. I've seen so many issues from students and also professionals who just wasted hours upon hours trying to figure out a weird ZBrush issue simply caused by their model not being clean enough. So the cleaner your model is, the better it's going to be down the line. So, all right, this is pretty much it for retopology. We're ready to bring this into ZBrush now. So we're just going to export all this out, and we can do this. We can do this by first saving our scene. Again, make sure you see this like scene has not been saved message. Now we can just export it out. We can just select them, select all of them. And ZBrush, up until recently, didn't really have a feature which allowed you to save out selected. If you go, for instance, to File, Export As, this will export the entire thing as one merged OBJ, which is really bad. We don't want that. But however, they implemented, I think this is a script that just slapped on top in Modo, export selected layers. And now we can set this to OBJ. And OBJ is just a standard format for bringing files between applications. So select OBJ, and here we can just set separate files. If this is not enabled, if this is the way if this is just by the default settings here, it's going to export out only what we have here, but it's going to export it into one file, which might be totally fine. but we want all of these here to be various subtools in ZBrush. So just hit separate files and hit here. And let's just put this under our directory, which is, again, in the way I've set it up, is project 3D. I have a lot of stuff here, like renders, reference, R&D and all that. 3D, geometry. And this would be, we can either have from Modo, because this is, well, from Modo, but I'm going to put it under ZBrush base OBJ. And this is release 2. So this keeps it really clean. Select folder, and just hit export. And it's going to tell us, hello, you're using a non-Modo format. This may not support stuff like lights and all that. Just hit, yeah, it's fine, we know what we're doing. And just hit yes. Now we can just go in here, go under here, go to 3D, geometry, ZBrush base OBJ, and release 2. And here you see all the files we had before. Again, we get these annoying MTL files, the annoying material files. We don't want material files. They're really annoying, and they serve absolutely no purpose in any way for me. I've never wanted a material file in my life. So I delete them out straight away, which is you just select type, and now it just filters them out like this, and just hit delete. And they are gone. So keep this file here. This is important. You want to have one master file which contains everything. For instance, we didn't have to bring the hair into Modo. We could have just kept that in ZBrush, but I like to have one model here which has the most up-to-date model, which has the correct naming and all that. So we're just going to, again, we're going to save this. And now I'm going to delete the reference here. And I'm just going to group this and call this light group, and call this chem, group. So now we have a really clean scene. Add a little bit of color here, change color, which is here. You don't have to do this. This is purely for organization. This looks nice. Now we have a tool here called, a model here, which has the model, the camera, and the light. And it's super clean. Again, the cleaner you go, the happier you're going to be down the line. Call this something like 05. And I like to add annotations or slight comments to the file names here. So I'm just going to call this retopo done. And that's it. That's it for the retopology. In the next chapter, we're going to project the sculpt onto this in ZBrush.